Well, we are in the season of Epiphany, which reminds me always of how God calls and is made known to us. Like starry skies of wise men, or doves descending, or in dreams that speak to us, or through the human invitations we hear to come and see, or to follow Jesus' way. And whatever our circumstance or the conditions that we travel, Epiphany is the assurance that God rides alongside us and over our shoulder, just like the moon does when landscapes fly by at night when we drive down the road. This morning, Isaiah gives an assurance to us that God is reliably there, asking us, have you not known? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth that God does marvelous things? Have you not heard in this pulpit and elsewhere that God's got this, even if it feels at times as though our own way has been hidden from the Lord, as Isaiah says, and our right disregarded by our God? The psalmist then adds that God gathers the exiles. God heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Now, in the late 5th century BCE, the empire of Babylon, under King Nebuchadnezzar, conquered Jerusalem, sending most of its inhabitants to exile in Babylon. Judah ceased to be an independent kingdom, and the people there were without a homeland now. They were in exile, taken away from home. In Jewish history, the exile in Babylon is a major theme of displacement and disorientation, where God's promise of care for God's people fell silent in their deportation. Where was God in this? And here is where Isaiah's questions have their force, because they point to Israel's emergence from exile. Our passage from Isaiah is believed to have been written at the time of King Cyrus, whose Persian Empire conquered Babylon in 539 and who allowed Israel to return from their exile, rebuild Jerusalem, and restore their home. Cyrus was the agent God used in Israel's restoration and return. So Isaiah's exclamations, have you not known? Have you not heard? Seem to me to be a cry of an incredulous God to a doubting people once the tide had shifted and Israel discovers that God has not, in fact, abandoned them. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Haven't I reassured you from the beginning? Now, we individually, I believe, can feel disoriented from God in ways that make us wonder just where God is or what God is up to. Whether through illness or loss of employment or relationship, or loss of our mental stability or our sense of purpose that we carry in life, or even through a suspension of our humanity for one reason or another, we can feel an exile of sorts and a spiritual isolation. It leaves us to wonder, where is God in this? Especially when the exile, goes on and on, which increases our sense of abandonment. It can carry us quite far down and maybe have us question our faith. This is exile on a personal level. Now, our gospel this morning also speaks these themes of disorientation and exile, and in this case, through the illness and spiritual suffering that Jesus encounters, and it speaks also of restoration and release. Jesus brings Simon's mother-in-law back to health, and the many people crowded in Simon's home that night also received their healing from Jesus. All of these folks had experienced exile and the spiritual isolation of loss, from which Jesus then brought return and release. Now, we're not told precisely how Jesus does this. Like to have been a fly on the wall there. We know Jesus took Simon's mother-in-law by the hand and lifted her up. A healing that included touch and included his presence. And we must assume that touch and presence, rather than recoil and distance, were part of what helped the others. Whatever it was, they experienced restoration to familiar lives and familiar ministrations through Jesus. Like the children of Israel who were returned to Jerusalem through Cyrus. The ongoing struggle of black Americans feels to me to be an extended exile of sorts. Not one that would be resolved through any sort of return, as it were, but through restoration of humanity, full humanity, that seems to me to have been suspended for centuries. Many black Americans will recall forebears kidnapped and carried in chains to these and other foreign shores as enslaved people. The Israelites were in exile in Babylon and displaced from who they were for 50 some odd years. Many black families and communities in America, displaced at one time from who they were, have nonetheless built a culture and identity living then for centuries in a country that is, of course, now fully home, albeit one that struggles still to embrace their full humanity and their common siblinghood. Not to mention embracing the contributions and sacrifices made by black Americans, some even while under enslavement, and building the country that still withholds its embrace. This seems, in my understanding and observation, to be a story of persistence and trust in turbulent waters. A story not yet able to claim Isaiah's "have you not known, have you not heard," but rather sighing the psalmist's question, which you'll find elsewhere, "How long, O Lord?" February is Black History Month, and we try at St. Michael's Church to mark this in our worship. Our music is a stirring and energizing celebration of black composers. Our prayers recognize what we have done and what we have left undone, which include America's original sin of systemic racism and the dogged resilience of its structure. Our preaching and teaching try to nourish our resolve to keep at it, to dismantle that system and find and embrace, as we can, those who are in exile. And the exile is long for everyone, because the exile of racism is alienation from each other and from God as a result. Alienation from God. Now, those who know Jesus and his care for his siblings and his work to do justice and to practice compassion and to work in reconciling a divided world know that his life shows us a way to change things. If we follow in Jesus' way, which he invites us to do during the Epiphany season, follow me, come and see, he says, we can find not just Jesus' way opens a path for God to help us to endure, but Jesus' way brings us to abundant life. The abundant life made manifest when we begin to heal and to bring one another from exile. It's not just survival, but it's abundance. Jesus, in his paradoxical, non-intuitive way, shows us that human touch across all sorts of difference and conditions and circumstance, human touch and presence can be healing. Part of what happens next in the exile of another, as they ask, where is God in this? Part of what happens next is our presence and touch and the embrace, which ultimately helps in transforming relationships. Standing with and alongside another in their struggles and suffering is what I think the Apostle Paul means about making himself a servant to all. Take note, in this healing story, Jesus heals, and then he moves along to the other towns. He doesn't remain with them, and he hasn't remained with us. Jesus, the first century rabbi, is gone. He departs in order to continue to proclaim his message elsewhere. He's come not to be a miracle worker in Mark's gospel, but to leave something for us. And that is the wisdom and teaching that we can take up, those of us who remain in his wake and are touched as we are by God, and then for us to deploy in and around our own lives. As one commentator says, Jesus wants to distinguish between what he can do for us and what he can be for us. We who then can do in serving others, but more importantly, can be in relationship with others. After all, it's not about the magic hands themselves, neither Jesus' hands nor anyone else's hands, but it's about God and how those hands point to God and lead from our own and from others' exiles to abundant life and to God. Come and follow along. Amen.